Can one bill reshape the American economy, redefine federal welfare, and redraw the country's fiscal map? Well, that's the bold promise behind President Donald Trump's sweeping legislative victory, now headed to the White House for a celebratory signing today. Dubbed the One Big Beautiful Bill, the measure pushes through historic tax cuts, expands defense and border spending, overhauls Medicaid work requirements, and lifts the federal debt ceiling by $5 trillion, all within a single legislative package. Passed after a marathon overnight vote in the House and previously cleared by the Senate, the bill signals a dramatic pivot in national policy and political turn. Framed by the White House as the launch pad for America's golden age, it now awaits a signature and a symbolic military flyover to seal its place in Trump-era history. Well, let's delve into the details. Good afternoon and welcome to today's Flash News. I am Tabitha Akor. Let's begin. President Donald Trump has celebrated the congressional passage of his sweeping domestic policy package, calling it a major economic milestone for the country. With the White House finalizing approval in a narrow overnight vote, the bill is now set for a high-profile signing ceremony at the White House on Independence Day. The legislation spanning tax reform, defense, border security, energy, and federal entitlement policies is one of the most comprehensive economic bills passed in recent history. President Trump has described the measure as transformative, predicting it will launch the U.S. economy into what the White House is calling a golden age. Take a look.
Writing like the biggest bill of its kind ever signed, and it's going to make this country into a rocket ship. It's going to be really great. I think when you go over the bill, it was very easy to get him to a yes. You know, we went over that bill, and point after point, biggest tax cut in history, great for security, great on the southern border, immigration is covered. We covered just about everything. Again, it's the biggest bill ever signed, and we had a good time in being there. I did not have much of a problem with any of them. As you know, we had 2 negative votes, but we had whatever it was, the final vote. It was not hard. This is a great bill. This is going to be a great bill for the country. Have growth at record numbers. This is going to be something that's amazing, and everybody was watching it all over the world. And I want to congratulate the Speaker and Tom Emmer and Steve Scalise and everybody else. I mean, they worked so hard. So hard. This has really been going on for over a year, if you think about it. I think, to be exact, about 14 months. And this was the culmination, and I guess it ended a lot earlier. A lot of people thought it would end up the following afternoon. Well, it ended up late in the evening, but they were...
President Trump celebrates the passage of the bill. Well, after a lengthy and contentious debate, the bill cleared the White House early Thursday morning with a 218 to 214 votes following Senate passage earlier in the week. While nearly all Republicans backed the measure, 2 GOP lawmakers opposed it, and no Democrats voted in favor. Trump's administration claims the bill delivers the largest tax cut in U.S. history, along with deep investment in national security and structural reforms to federal welfare programs. A White House spokesperson said the bill is designed to slash deficits and debt while catalyzing long-term economic growth. However, we see that economists and opposition lawmakers have raised questions about how significant tax cuts, defense spending hikes, and a $5 trillion debt ceiling increase can coexist with fiscal responsibility. Now, will the administration's growth projections offset the rising national debt? And how will the bill's provisions impact lower-income Americans? many of whom rely on the very federal programs being restructured. What then are the key policy highlights? We see that the bill introduces permanent extensions to the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, alongside new temporary deductions for typed and overtime wages, as well as a tax break for citizens aged 65 and over. It also includes a rollback of green energy tax incentives introduced during the Biden administration. We also see increased funding for national defense and immigration and customs enforcement. Also, a $5 trillion increase to the national debt ceiling, aiming to avert a federal default. And finally, new and expanded work requirements for Medicaid and food assistance programs. Now we see that President Trump announced that the bill will be signed on Friday, July 4th at 5 p.m. during a patriotic ceremony at the White House. Now the event will feature a military flyover with B-2 bombers, F-22s and F-35s, symbolizing the bill's alignment with national strength and security. The administration has also framed the signing as the beginning of a new economic era. Supporters have praised the package as bold and comprehensive, while critics argue it deepens inequality and undermines federal support systems. Will this legislative win lead to the promised economic acceleration or expose deepening divides in fiscal ideology and social equity? Well, as the bill becomes law, its rollout and public reception will likely shape the remainder of President Trump's term and potentially the broader policy direction of the country. Now, the announcement of this bill was made by Johnson Mike, and he made a statement. Take a listen.
Colleagues on both sides of the aisle, we've waited long enough. Some of us have literally been up for days now. But this day is a hugely important one in the history of our nation. We have a big job to finish, and that's why we're here on the week of July 4th, just a day before now, America's birthday. It was on that fateful day, as a Democrat leader acknowledged, that our founders pledged their lives and their sacred honor to this grand experiment in self-governance that we are now here to steward. It's an experiment that falls to us to guard and to protect it. We take that very seriously on this side of the aisle. In just a few moments, we will remind the world why the American experiment still endures today and why its best days are still ahead of us.
So much hopes on the bill. Well, the path to passage was far from smooth. Although the bill was approved by the Senate late last month, significant changes introduced by the upper chamber triggered discontent within the House. Some moderate Republicans expressed concern about increased financial pressure on states that had expanded Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act. Meanwhile, fiscal conservatives criticized the bill for not going far enough to cut federal spending. Now, despite internal resistance, Republican leadership extended Wednesday's proceedings well into the early hours of today. Eventually, we see that the final rule vote passed after 3 o'clock a.m. today, allowing full debate to begin. Analysts question whether pushing major legislation during such unconventional hours signals strength or desperation in legislative strategy. Now, what do Democrats have to say? We see that Democrats challenge the bill's rush timeline, with party leadership delaying proceedings through extended floor speeches and procedural resistance. Now, also behind the scenes, Republican lawmakers held closed-door negotiations throughout Wednesday in an attempt to unify their caucus. Some members initially withheld their support or abstained, forcing leadership to keep the vote open for hours while securing final commitment. We also see that observers have questions. And these questions include, does last-minute persuasion and procedural maneuvering undermine democratic transparency, especially on legislation of such scale and impact, the big, beautiful bill? We see that the legislation's financial component has sparked fierce debate. While Republicans argue the tax relief targets working and middle-class families, critics claim the bill benefits the wealthy and cuts support for vulnerable populations. How will this affect public trust in the federal government's commitment to economic equity? Although the bill has passed, its long-term viability and public perception remain uncertain. We see that the narrow margins and internal division among JOP ranks hint at potential challenges ahead, especially as lawmakers face scrutiny over social welfare reforms, immigration enforcement measures, and deep spending cuts. We see that the bill's approval just before Independence Day is symbolically powerful, but also politically strategic. Now, does this reflect genuine policy progress? Or is it more about shaping optics ahead of the election season? As institutions prepare for implementation, analysts will closely monitor how federal agencies, state governments, and local communities respond to the sweeping changes, and whether the promised benefit materializes across party lines. That's the Democrats and Republicans. Well, the coming days will justify that. Now, moving on over to the Middle East, we see that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited the Kibbutz of Nir Oz near the Gaza border on Thursday, his first visit since the October 7th, 2023 Hamas incursion that left nearly a quarter of the community's residents either killed or kidnapped. The visit comes amid widespread criticism over the government's failure to prevent the attack and intensifying public demands for the return of hostages still held in Gaza. Netanyahu, accompanied by his wife Sarah, was met with a mix of protest, support, and emotional appeals from survivors and families of those still missing. Take a look, such an emotional scene. Now, well, we'll see right there on your screen. During the tour of the devastated kibbutz, Netanyahu expressed a strong commitment to securing the return of all hostages, including those believed to be deceased, and pledged support for the community's reconstruction. The visit precedes a scheduled meeting on Monday between Netanyahu and U.S. President Donald Trump at the White House, where they will discuss a Washington-backed proposal for a 60-day ceasefire. The plan reportedly includes a phased release of hostages held by Hamas. Meanwhile, the October 2023 assault by Hamas militants, which crossed the Gaza border in Israel, was the deadliest attack on Jews since the Holocaust. According to Israeli figures, 1,200 people were killed and 251 were taken hostage. Now, among those meeting, Prime Minister Netanyahu at Nir Oz was Inav Zankorker, the mother of a hostage believed to be alive in Gaza. She had previously accused the Prime Minister of prioritizing political interest over ending the conflict, but embraced him during this visit. Later, she shared her concerns about her son's deteriorating health condition and urged Netanyahu to act decisively for the release of all remaining hostages. Israel's military campaign in Gaza has led to the death of more than 57,000 Palestinians, according to Gaza's health ministry. We see that the offensive has displaced the majority of the enclave's over 2 million residents, also created severe food shortages, and left large parts of the territory in ruins. We also see that the humanitarian and political stakes remain high, as pressure mounts, both domestically and internationally, for a comprehensive resolution to the ongoing conflict. We hope that this comes to an end soon. Well, still on President Donald Trump, over to African scene, we take a move right there. We see that in a move that has reignited debates about strategic diplomacy and African agency, the United States President Donald Trump has invited 5 African heads of state to a closed-door summit in Washington, D.C., which is scheduled for July 9th to 11th, 2025. Now, the select nations, Senegal, Gabon, Mauritania, Guinea-Bissau, and Liberia, have been chosen for what the Trump administration describes as a focused conversation on commercial diplomacy, critical minerals, and regional security cooperation. Well, this visit, described as Trump's most significant outreach to Africa since returning to the political scene, the summit is being organized by the United States Department in coordination with the participating embassies. The event has sparked controversy across the continent, not only for its exclusivity, but for its broader implications on African diplomacy, sovereignty, and unity. While the United States has framed the summit as a platform for building strategic partnerships, critics say the exclusion of major regional players such as Nigeria, South Africa, Ethiopia, Ghana, and Cote d'Ivoire reflects a narrow and interest-driven approach. Even more striking is the lack of representation from countries or regions grappling with internal conflict or demands for self-determination, such like Ambazonia, we see the Southern Cameroons. And the Amazonian crisis, which has persisted for over 8 years, remains largely ignored on major global platforms. The region's absence from diplomatic conversations, particularly in a summit supposedly focused on peace and regional security, highlights the tendency of global powers to prioritize economic utility over humanitarian urgency. What message does it send when a summit on African security excludes the most fragile and volatile regions? Yet, while the 5 invited countries stand to gain from enhanced bilateral ties and investment opportunities, Africa as a whole risks being diplomatically divided. The summit undermines the African Union's vision of continental unity and collective diplomacy as entrenched in Agenda 2063. Well, for the Amazonian people, the silence is still deafening. The ongoing conflict with Cameroon has resulted in thousands of deaths, mass displacement, and a generation deprived of education and healthcare. Yet, the absence of Amazonian from discussions on peace and security indicates that their struggle remains invisible in global corridors of power. Sadly, and well, as the continent navigates competing external interests, the summit may set a precedent for future engagements, smaller, exclusive, and interest-based gatherings that prioritizes state-level strategic value over collective African priorities. Trump's Selective Africa Summit is more than a diplomatic event. It is a mirror reflecting the fractures in Africa's global engagement strategy. While some countries may gain investment and visibilities, others remain on the fringe, including those like Amazonia, whose aspirations for freedom and recognition are still waiting for a seat at the table. If Africa is to shape its own future, it must demand inclusive diplomacy and also amplify its collective voice. Well, until next time, this is where we'll be drawing the curtain in today's Flash News. Stay tuned for Horizon at the top of the hour, 4 p.m. Until then, stay safe.